I would like to acknowledge that this video is being filmed on the traditional lands of the Wurrundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people who may be watching this video today. Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This one is relatively long. I haven't split this one in half like I did last week, but yeah, there's still quite a few books to get through. If you are unfamiliar with this series, it is where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading, so we're going to jump straight in. I do have some kids books this week. To be honest, I used to say I didn't typically share the kids books that I read, and I don't share the ones that I read in the classroom because then we would be here forever, although I have contemplated reviving my teaching channel and talking about kids' books there. These are books that I either received for review, I got early copies of, or just special books that I've picked up for a particular reason and I wanted to share them with you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is my reading week from the 27th of May until the 3rd of June. I read a total of 13 books this week. That equated to 1,886 pages, and my yearly reading total is 257 books. So we are going to talk about the kids' books first, just to get them out of the way. One book that I received, I think unexpectedly, for review from Scholastic is Crumbs by Phil Cummings and Shane DeVries, which is an absolutely beautiful book. I mean, just look at this cover. But this is the story of a father and a daughter who are out and about in the city. They're having lunch outside and they see someone who is homeless. And Ella is watching him, and she's just a young girl and she doesn't know what she can do to help. But her father shows her how to show basic human decency and kindness and compassion and how to honor people with dignity. And it is just absolutely stunning. Definitely check it out. I think this might already be out, so if you have kids, this is one that's probably worth considering. I also bought myself a copy of Llamas In Pyjamas by Matt Cosgrove, which is a completely different change of pace. I actually bought 4 copies of this one for each member of my teaching team at work because in a couple of weeks we have our foundation breakfast where all the kids come to school in their pajamas and we have breakfast and then they get changed and all that jazz. So Llamas In Pyjamas is the next book in the Dharma the Llama series, and it is a rhyming, very fun story. This one is about Dharma, who is the llama who loves to read, but in this case now she has also taken up babysitting and she gets called out to help with some twins who really don't want to go to bed. And it's very sweet, very funny, and I'm saving this to read to the kids for our foundation breakfast. Then 2 kids picture books that I actually got through Amazon as part of their Amazon First Reads, I think that's what it's called, First Reads thing. Sometimes I pick up adult titles, sometimes I pick up the kids titles if there's nothing that interests me in the adults catalogue. Earlier in the year I picked up a book called I Am You by, and I really hope that I'm not mispronouncing this, so apologies if I am, Refilio Mahaloli. I apologise profusely. Now this one says it is a book about Ubuntu, which I believe is a belief from Southern Africa, which is the idea that we are all connected. And this is a really gorgeous story of saying, you know, how I treat you is how I treat myself, and so on and so forth. And it was absolutely stunning and really gorgeous. So this is also another one that I would highly recommend. I want to get a physical copy of this, if not for my classroom, for the school, because it was just all around gorgeous. And the other one that I read was Pink Is Not a Colour. Now this one doesn't come out until July, I don't think, and it's by Lindsay Ward. This is about the colours who are hosting a rainbow party, and Pink discovers that she is not actually a colour, she is a tint, because she's not part of the rainbow. And, you know, she begins to question all sorts of things about herself, but then she begins to meet other tints and shades and other colours that don't fit the mould of colours because of, you know, they're not primary or secondary or tertiary colours. It's a really good story about inclusion. It's about recognising your strengths and recognising that it's okay to be different. But it was really fun, and this would be a really good art book, particularly for colours and colour theory. And it was written by the author who was researching colour theory, and that's how the story came about. But it was really fun and I enjoyed it. All right, then moving into the adult titles that I read this week. I buddy read A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall with Bree, and I'm still thinking about this book a week later. Like, this was the very first book that I read this week. It is absolutely stunning. We have a trans heroine in this historical romance. This is about Viola and her sister-in-law Louisa. To the rest of the world, Viola is Louisa's companion. They don't know the truth of her. Okay, so editing Steph here, realising that I did a truly terrible job of recapping A Lady for a Duke, mostly just because I was so excited and I was rambling, because Louisa is actually Louise, and I was mixing up who all the characters were, the side characters were. So in this story, Viola and Louise receive a letter from Miranda, who is the Duke of Gracewood's younger sister, and he is her guardian. And the Duke of Gracewood was also Viola's best friend. And they went off to war to Waterloo together, and he believes that Viola died there. Now, when they get this letter from Miranda, they begin to realise that maybe things are not quite going so great at the Duke's home, and so they decide to go there because Miranda is 17 and Louise really wants her to have her time to come out into society and to be around people her own age. And so that's the premise for them going there. And Viola is really nervous about this because she doesn't really want to have to see Justin because he's part of her old life, and she is convinced that he's going to figure out who she is, and she's not ready for that. Meanwhile, when they get there, they find out that he is not in a good place. He has PTSD, he is using laudanum for injuries that he sustained in the war, and he is grieving his dead friend. And he and Viola begin to strike up this new friendship, which is before he realizes who she is. And the whole book is about them restarting their friendship now that they know the truth of one another, about this burgeoning, beautiful relationship that comes about from them, spending time and getting to know each other as their realist selves. And the whole thing was just absolutely stunning, and I adored it. My God, this is an amazing book. Alexis Hall is truly, truly a masterful writer, and I cannot recommend this one enough. Probably my favorite historical romance ever. I loved this, and I loved talking to Bree about it. It was just a stunning read. We know that I can wax lyrical about Alexis Hall for days. I will say that in A Lady for a Duke, you do have content warnings for war injuries, disability, drug use, ableist language, dead names, and incorrect pronouns, so be aware of that going into it. Then I decided to pick up a book that I've been seeing for, months and months and months. And that is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. This is a paranormal monster romance. It is honestly delightful. This is the story of Cinnamon, who after a night out drinking with her best friend Bree, ends up stumbling home and coming across a demon. And she ends up saving the demon, who then comes to find her because she has unwittingly saved him from the thrall of the local deity, who happens to be a dead necromancer witch. He needs her help in order to free the land from this witch's thrall. And he does so by threatening her family, and basically she travels around with him on a road trip. So we have a lot of forced proximity here, and the reveal of what kind of demon he is just truly amazing. And I absolutely adored this one. Sorry if you heard alarms going off, I don't know what that was. Then I read the novella that takes place in between That Time I Saved a Demon and the next book, and this was Mistlefoe. This is about a woman whose father is a blacksmith and has stolen some ore from a demon and ends up being cursed so that everything that he makes turns sentient and starts talking to him and to clients, which is highly hilarious. And in order to stop this, because it's really preventing them from selling any of the weapons that they make, she goes off to confront the demon and to try and bargain for the release of the curse on her father. He agrees on the condition that she fake date him to a demon event because he needs a partner in order to show that he is committed to providing for the land that he wants to hold the territory for. So really, really fun. Talking swords. We love it. Honestly, the talking sword is hilarious. And incidentally, that talking sword also pops up in the second book in the Mead Mishaps book. And that is That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf, which is honestly one of my favorite titles ever. It is so good. The werewolf in this story we do meet in the first book, and the heroine in this book is Bree, who is the best friend of Cinnamon from the first book. So Bree happens to work with cheese. That's her family business. I should say the character names in here are fantastic because they all relate to something that's a big part of their lives. Anyway, Bree is trying to hold off some unwanted advances from one of the local townsmen, and she ends up accidentally throwing a love potion onto Felix, who is a werewolf. And he is looking for his fated mate, and he believes that that is Bree, but she believes that he is still under the hold of the love potion, and so they decide to try and break this love potion to see if that fated mate bond is actually true or not. Really fun, very steamy. Loved it. Then I reread Sing Me to Sleep. This happened to be the 250th book that I read this year, so that was exciting. And this is actually the traveling book copy. I own my own copy of this, but this is a traveling book that Bree started. This book has actually been annotated by RM Virtues and was then sent to Bree, then to me, and I will be sending it on to the next person who I've got to double check who that is. It was so fun to revisit this book and to read not only RM's comments, but also Bree's, and then add mine, and it's really fun. So this is a monster romance. It is is novella length, and it is about a sleep demon who ends up visiting a young woman named Penny who is having trouble sleeping since a home invasion that left her father dead. And she has tried all sorts of things, but then Acheron begins to visit her in her sleep, and the two begin to form this really intense connection. There is a lot of kinks, content warning, and triggers in this book. In terms of those, you have loss of a parent off-page. There is also an on-page death. The book does feature CNC, a character who is dealing with PTSD, trauma, and depression. There is also degradation and humiliation, and there's a whole lot of other content warnings that you can check out for this book, but it is fantastic. I love that this has a representation of sleep paralysis, which can be truly, truly scary to experience, especially when you don't know what it is. The whole thing is great because Acheron is a sleep demon who is supposed to feed off the fear of others, and yet once he meets Penny, he finds that he, doesn't like the taste of her fear, and that sort of kickstarts their relationship. Loved it. Can't wait to read more books set in this universe. And because we have kickstarted into June, I'm now trying to get through all of my queer books, so this totally counts. But I also read a novella that I had not read before. This one was Coffee Boy by S.A. Chant, or Austin Chant. You may know the author as. I think their preference though now is to go by S.A. Chant. I will say this novella does have a content warning for misgendering and incorrect use of pronouns for one of the characters, because one of the characters is a trans man. We follow Kieran, who is in his early 20s. He's graduated college, but he's kind of sort of just drifting along. He doesn't really know what he's going to do until he gets a job as an intern working in an office for a political campaign. There he meets Seth, who is the campaign manager, and who is very organized, very to the point, and very controlling, just in terms of he likes things to run a particular way in the office. But as Kieran gets to know Seth, he begins to understand him a little bit more, and the two end up having this beautiful relationship. This is an age gap romance. There's about is it 10 years? It's about 10 years between the two of them, and also Seth is bisexual. I also read Where the Devil Don't Go by Onley James. This was her most recent drop. It is an demon romance story, and this one has quite a few content warnings. I'm gonna have to read these because there's a lot of them. There's past physical and sexual trauma, past prolonged psychological trauma. We're just gonna wait for the ambulance to go past up to the hospital at the end of the road. There is anxiety, suicidal ideation, and also disordered eating, so be very wary going into this. This book also started out as a serial in Onley James's newsletter, and to that end there are certain points where a couple of things that jumped out at me were the repetition of information that occurred in one chapter that then pops up again in another chapter, and then again later on, just because of the nature of the serial telling. So this may get edited again, but just be aware of that going into it, because a couple of times I'm like, hang on, didn't I just read that? But then I had to remember that it was originally released as a serial. And now we have a police car. This is the great thing about living in between a major hospital and a police station. We're just going to keep going because otherwise we'll be here all day. This is about Christopher, who has spent a significant period of time as a sex slave for an incubus, and he is saved when Samyaza, or Sam, turns up to kill this incubus because he is one of his creations. And Sam is basically a fallen angel who has been tasked with hunting down all of the creatures that he has created in order to earn redemption, which basically means he'll end up dying. So there's a lot of religious imagery and ideas in here, just in terms of angels and demons and that sort of stuff. So if that's not your thing, I would skip it. And initially Sam is going to kill Christopher, but then Christopher offers himself to Sam, and so Sam decides to keep him, despite the fact that this causes a huge rift between him and all of the other demons on Earth. This one was just okay. I actually didn't realize that this was coming out, and I just read it because one, it was Onley James, and two, I like angel and demon stories. But as with all angel and demon stories, I am very, very picky about what I love within this genre. This didn't quite hit the mark, although it was a very entertaining read. I also got a review copy of Found by the Lake Monster by Lillian Lark, and I was so excited by this. So this came directly from the author, so thank you very much to Lillian Lark. This is a novella. It is set in her Love Bathhouse series, so it's not part of the main series, but it's sort of tangential, and it does link into the short story that I read in the anthology Into the Woods. I will say this one does have conversations around fertility and fertility issues, so be aware of that going into it. We follow Amy, who is a human woman who has been roped into going out on a monster hunt in the forest around a lake, and they are trying to track down this lake monster. And she's an accountant. She's very out of her depth in terms of participating in this hunt. and she gets scared by something and she ends up running through the woods and ends up crashing into the lake monster, and his name is Adrian. Adrian is a total sweetheart. Adrian is in heat and he is waiting for a date that has been arranged by a matchmaker from the bathhouse, and he mistakenly assumes that Amy is that date. And Amy doesn't really do anything to disabuse him of that notion, and indeed plays into it. So there is lying in here, so if that's not your thing, be aware of it. This is a relatively shortish novella, so it does come to a head quite quickly. And part of it is she feels safe with this lake monster, and as they have dinner together, she really gets to like him, and she's feeling like she begins to feel worse and worse about the fact that she's lied to him in the first place, because it becomes really clear that they are fated mates. And of course, it's all going really great until it's revealed that she's not the date, and then all sorts of things ensue. Honestly, this was just fun and weird. I have not read a lake monster romance, so that was highly entertaining. But yes, definitely check the content and trigger warnings for this book before you pick it up. But Lillian Luck always does a good job, and it's always really fun. And then the final book that I read this week was actually a reread for me, and I have not reread this book since 2017, and it is Peter Darling by Austen or S.A. Chant. And this is a queer Peter Pan retelling. It is the relationship between Peter Pan and Hook, and Peter Pan is a trans man. I always really struggle to describe this book because part of me feels like I'm missing something, even though I love this book. Like, I love this book to death, but part of me feels like I personally have missed something. But in this world, Peter Pan left Neverland and has returned, and it's years later. He's now grown, and all of the characters have aged and grown up a little bit, and it's not quite the way that he left it. And yet Peter is determined to resume his ongoing feud with Captain Hook. This disrupts the balance that has been left in Neverland in Peter's absence, and he doesn't quite know what to do with that until he ends up being stuck underground in a cave where they're trying to find their way out with Hook, and they're forced to confront the reality of Neverland and this attraction between the two of them, the reason why they have constantly been enemies with each other. I do really like the relationship in here and the way that it culminates at the end. But the thing that I love the most about it is that it does what I like Peter Pan retellings to do, and it calls into question all of the questionable ideals of Neverland and the Peter Pan story in general. And I love that. I love that sort of analysis of it because, you know, when you think about it, Peter Pan is actually quite a disturbing story, and this doesn't shy away from pointing out the problematic elements of the Peter Pan story. I love it. It was so nice to go back and reread it. This was one of the first indie books that I'd read back when I was, new on BookTube. And I think this one was recommended to me by Kathy. And honestly, I don't regret it. It's gorgeous. I think this has had a rebranding of the cover, but I really do love this one. I'm so glad that I reread it, especially for Pride Month. All right, so those are all the books that I read this week. In the comments, I would love to know if you have read any of them or if you're planning on picking any of them up. If you want to let me know that you're here, feel free to leave a potion emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.